Knowing others is intelligence. Knowing yourself is true wisdom. Mastering others is strength. Mastering yourself is true power. If you realize that you have enough, you are truly rich. Mm-hmm. If you stay in the center and embrace death with your whole heart, you will endure forever.
That was my guest this week, Coach Lee Torres, reading chapter 33 from the Tao Te Ching. Hello, I'm your host, MartinJon, and this is the Recover Yourself podcast, where we're talking with people with long-term recovery about recovering to, beyond recovering from. We all have to go through many transitions in our lives. And for those of us that have addiction in our past, we have to go through something very specific. Coach Lee Torres and I talk about transitioning in your life and how taking note of where those transitions are existing and understanding where we're becoming another person becomes a really important aspect to how we're going to grow. At the end of this podcast, I asked Coach Lee if he'd be interested in picking a Tao number so we can incorporate some of the Tao chats that I do with this episode. He picked number 33. And the last two lines of this chapter states, if you can embrace death with your whole heart, you will endure forever. And at the end of this episode, Coach Lee and I talk about that and talk about the idea that we have died. We have had parts of ourselves, our identities have perished. Our identities have died. But we've embraced that, and we've embraced who we've become beyond that. And that's a great metaphor for this entire episode. So I want you to listen through to the end and see how the Tao that he chose relates so seamlessly with everything that we spoke about. Lee, thank you so much for joining me. I'm super excited, especially because I want to definitely talk about the boxing gym that you started and everything that you're doing right now. But I want to start with how much time do you have?
I celebrated 11 years sober in May, so just a little over 11 years.
What have you learned about yourself, or what did you discover about yourself within that time that really is kind of making you move forward in your life as it is your own?
So the most significant thing that comes to mind first is that I didn't like myself. And this was even 3 years into recovery, into sobriety, that I didn't really like myself. I didn't realize what a dishonest, selfish, manipulative person I was. And that's why at the end of the day, I had trouble looking myself in the mirror and just kind of appreciating myself as a human on this earth. So it wasn't until I realized that, and I had a way of looking at that and realizing that I didn't have to be that way anymore, that I started to feel a sense of possibility of kind of being free, and my life opening up to me a little bit from there.
I want to ask you about your practice today. What goes into your day that is making your life like so much more valuable than it was back when you just started?
So there are certain things I call it my recovery practice. And for my recovery practice, there are things that don't seem like a really big deal if I just kind of take one out. They seem kind of maybe overly simplistic, but things like I get up and I do pray or set some kind of intention for the day to kind of just get my head in the day and remind myself who I am and try to get my mind going in a direction that feels like it can be productive and useful, hopefully somewhere in the day to myself and others. A gratitude list. I make a gratitude list, and sometimes when I get too fancy, I really try to keep it simple to things like the fact that I have shelter, safe shelter, because there were years in my childhood I didn't have safe shelter. I have safe, warm, dry shelter. I have clean water. I mean, there are cities in our country that don't have clean water. I'm clothed. I have nothing fancy, but they're good enough, and I have a place to wash these clothes when they're ready to be washed. So a gratitude list is helpful. I do still attend 12-step meetings during the week. I find that I find that it helps keep me connected and kind of gives me opportunities to practice being vulnerable, as well as to shut up and listen to what's going on with someone else. One of the other things in my recovery practice is meditation. Is one that has actually helped me so much in the last several years as well, to just sit and get still with myself.
Yeah. And I just want to say, these are practices, like the practices that we're talking about are not about getting sober, right? Like these are about getting real and living your life to this other point, right? Like bringing it up that next level. This isn't about sobriety as much as like, I want to recover all that I can be. And that's something that you're definitely doing. So 11 years is quite a bit of time. Can you go over a couple stages that you went through, or that maybe you're going through even right now that are shifting?
Yeah, that's actually, I think, a really great question, and probably one that's that makes sense to me, that would be asked by someone who also has some time in recovery.
Yeah.
It's like, I feel like all of life is just one continuous transition.
Absolutely.
And, what do I say? I've been through gender transition, and marriage and divorce, and one big one that really came up seemingly out of nowhere, I know better now, is trauma. Like feeling, I suppose each stage I get to a place where maybe I feel a little safer in recovery, and like, okay, here's the next thing that you can deal with that's going to feel really, 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 really hard.
Yeah.
So processing a really traumatic childhood, I continue to process that, but with each stage, with each thing, owning a business, oh my God, I can't tell you what a spiritual experience that is presented itself to be. But with each kind of thing that's come up that has felt like, whoa, maybe this is the hardest thing I've been through, and maybe this is the hardest thing I've been through, it has felt like I've been able to have a little more perspective and patience, that like, hey, I don't know the answer, and that's okay. And just a little trust that it'll be all right. Instead of having to know like what it's going to look like, oh, okay, well, that's what it is right now. We'll see what happens in a week or a month or a year.
In terms of like that changing and that growing, were there things, how do you see growth and change today, and what in your life exists today that even though you don't know how, is going to change, I don't even want to say that there's struggles now. You're just like, oh, I know one day this is not going to be how I define myself.
So I'm just going with the first answer that occurs to me, and it has to do with my traumatic childhood. Mm-hmm. And that has been years in process, and I'm humbled to think every time it occurs to me that there's no way that I could be doing or could have done the work that I've done around that if I were still getting loaded.
Right.
Like, there's just no way. It's just not possible. And so as hard as it's felt at times emotionally, to kind of grow through that, and with the help of yes, there's my 12-step program, but there's also therapy, and now I just started neurofeedback, and I have a supportive community with my partner and friends. So it feels like I'm kind of, I don't want to say, I don't know what the end is. I don't know what that's supposed to look like, if there is one for this, right?
Right.
But I feel like I'm kind of at the tail-ish end of something, of kind of I don't know if closure is the right word, but maybe some peace around that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And is that peace around accepting you as like the perfection of life, or like how do you see, like, how would you be able to define that nebulous understanding that you have?
I think as far as I've gotten right now is really letting go of some of the ways I didn't realize that victim mentality can still have a grip in the way that my brain functions, in the way that my in my thinking process. How that shows up for me, because there were a lot of ways I identified it earlier on. First, I was not a victim, right? There's
no, you had so many places to place blame. How were you a victim? Like,
yeah, exactly. Oh, the irony. And then there were kind of some ways that felt a little more obvious that I could identify it. And then even more recently, it's like, whoa, I think that is some victim mentality. And don't get me wrong, I mean that with actually a great deal of compassion for myself, because I was a victim at one time in my life when I was a child, and I had no control over circumstances. And now I'm in my 40s, and I have a good life, and it's a thriving life. It's a growing life. So that's one of the ways is really recognizing, seeing something there around my awareness of that, acceptance of that, and being able to kind of release that and live from the other side of that.
Yeah,
seems like one that's showing up for me. And
that's beautiful.
And that kind of also shows up in a way of me having kind of a little more respect for my gut intuitions. Yeah. And on my self-esteem.
Mm-hmm. So I'm super excited that you're saying all this, because that's the point. Can you talk to me about your gym and how that all came about, and how your recovery was either part of that, or how your recovery led to that?
Yeah, sure. So as far as the gym, I'm in Seattle here, and we're in White Center, and boxing has always been a part of my life. I was thinking earlier about how, like, the 5-year-old me would be thrilled with me right now. Like, if that 5-year-old existed in this room with me, he would be beside himself.
Yeah.
Like, heck yeah, here's a boxing gym. But somewhere in that, that period from wherever to before I opened the gym, a lot of life happened. And anyway, long story short, I actually stepped away from boxing for a handful of years when I had been involved in it, whether I was training or volunteering somewhere or competing or whatever. I stepped away from it for a number of years in recovery. It's interesting because I realized that not at the time. At the time, as far as I got with my understanding of what was happening for me, was that I didn't. I was trying to get something squeeze something out of boxing, and I couldn't figure out why I couldn't get whatever that was I was trying to squeeze from it. And it had to do with identity. Here I was at the time, I think, something like a year away from my last drink. And things were shifting for me, and I was still stuck on this old identity of who, the more obvious one to describe is who I was as a boxer. But who I am as a boxer is who I am in all the rest of my life.
Absolutely.
And so that kept showing up, and there was this disconnect. And so stepped away for a while, sad, and kind of had to grieve, as silly as that might sound to some people. Like, so what? You left a sport. But it's really, this is like my martial art. And then in recovery, I really kind of hunkered down and focused all of my energies on recovery before anything else. And so for me, and I want to emphasize that whatever people do to get well and live their fullest, healthiest life. I totally respect that. Not everyone's journey has to look exactly like Lee's, like I've got it all figured
Or
out.
anything like yours, right? Like fuck you, I got my shit. Like
Exactly. And so, but for me, what it had to look like was kind of 3 years of being this dry, unhappy person.
right.
And then I poured myself into a 12-step program and really focused, because I had a moment of being honest with myself in that time, that I was just like unhappy. Oh, I've got a few more bucks in my pocket. Unhappy. And then realized I'm going to get drunk. Like, I'm going to get drunk. I have not grown. I hadn't grown in years. So anyway, fast forward, and I just really focused on recovery for years. Like, really just kind of let my life grow from there. Really focused on me, I guess, is a way of saying that. And got some peace in my life, and just started kind of coaching boxing part-time. I was a fitness professional. I was coaching fitness, but started doing that. And then it just kind of blew up a little. This little spark caught a flame, and that little flame kind of got fed and came up into it's a nice little roaring flame, I guess, a fire, and ended up in our gym.
Nice. Wonderful. Well, that's, and that the fact that like you look back and you're like, well, I mean, it was hard. It was hard to get to where you are, right? Like there was a lot of work, but it was, and I always like to refer back to the Tao, and that was the thing that really sparked my attention with you, I believe, is that you also posted something that was Tao related on Instagram, and that's what made me go, oh, I want to talk to you, because it was like that's a connection that got me through a lot of my recovery, right? Like, and when you talk about this idea that like, oh, this just like these things naturally sort of just took place and it grew, right? And go on.
So I was just going to say that I completely credit my recovery work with all of the good that I have in my life today, or all of the growth, including being able to be a boxing coach for however long that lasts. I'm not super duper attached to how that has to look. I have to mind myself.
Right.
But I credit that because people don't tend to give you money when they have a gnarly feeling about your integrity or your ability to show up and return the service you promised them. They don't show up if you're kind of abusive in the way that you treat others, or they see that you're treating people poorly and you're a very unkind person. And so absolutely, my ability, just being able to show up when I'm tired, being tired, not feeling like it. Yeah, there are days I'm like, I don't feel like getting up at 5:30 in the morning, or working, whatever it is. Whatever. The interesting thing is, I can't remember the last time I felt like oh my God, I just don't want to do work at all.
Right.
I can't even remember that. It might be a little like, oh, I'd like to sleep 10 more minutes, or like having the task list that is just such a bear that it all, and that feeling like it has to all be done at one time. It's just like, no, I can't look, like you're looking at a scary movie. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about. It's like,
I know, super overwhelmed about like, I don't even know how to break this apart to do the first thing. What is the first thing? Like I have yes. No. I think, like that, this is something that I've noticed between so many people that are in recovery, that it's just like, oh wait, we do this to ourselves because we're novelty seekers, right? We're looking to like kind of fill ourselves, but when we do that, sometimes the bucket gets way too full and we're like, oh shit, like I don't know what to do with this. And we love it, right? We kind of like, oh, well, let's see how I can break this apart. How can I do it? And then we achieve it, and it's like, well, that wasn't that bad.
Oh God, yeah. But thank you for sharing what you'd shared, because I guess I'm hearing kind of that, and this speaks a little more to what I was talking about, and that what I'm calling right now, that victim mentality, that kind of, is shrouded around the brain and can get it thinking. I'm kind of stuck in, like, I think what you're calling recovering from, like, oh, I'm trying to get away from this. I'm trying to, instead of, I have a future. I have a future now. And that actually has been a big challenge for me in recovery, to realize, like, whoa, wait a minute, I get to have a future. It's like wide open, like staring out at the open sea. And I get to have that. Like, oh, wait, you mean that's okay? Like, I can do that? That has had to be a reminder for me in recovery.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And just to, like, when you know you have a future, you have so much more reason to think in the way of a person who has a future, right?
Yeah.
And before you hit that bottleneck of, like, recover from to recover to, it's like you're back, like everything behind you is wide, right? All of the things you're recovering from, all of the things you're trying to leave behind, all of the things. And then this idea of, like, wait, I'm coming to something, right? And you keep having to, like, nudge and kind of get yourself through. And then as that opens up to, like, everything that's in front of you, like, I kind of feel like you leave behind these labels of, or I've left behind the label of alcoholic or drug user, or, like, all of the things, or abuser, or whatever it was that I'm leaving behind, and I'm opening up to, like, the possibility of so much more.
Yeah, it just occurred to me as you were explaining that I've been thinking, having to remind myself the last couple of weeks, of that. I've heard people say time and again, there's like pain in letting go, like the pain of letting go of stuff. And I mean, the perspective shift that has been helping me with that is actually, no, the pain's in holding on. The pain is not in letting go. The pain is in, like, holding on and carrying that stuff, whether it's labels, old hurts, memories, is like holding on to that stuff. And I know it's just kind of maybe some semantics, but there's something in recognizing that, like, oh, it actually is less painful to just let go and kind of move that way than it is to stay back here kind of curled up in a ball in the middle of that stuff.
Yeah. And there's fear in letting go, and that's what that is.
Yeah.
Right? There's fear. And as soon as you let go, you get that feeling that we talked about earlier, that overwhelming feeling of just, like, I don't know what to do, because I'm so used to hanging on to all of these other ideas. You let go of all of those ideas. Like I always say, we have to give up our lives for recovery for a number of ways. Like, right? Like, there's first the addiction. We give up our entire life for our addiction and for our mentality and for that sort of victim state. And then we have to bring it all together and give our lives up completely to recovery. We have to just worry about being sober. But then beyond that, like, everything can open up for us, because we've walked through that. We have let go of everything, and now we're stripped of everything that we knew ourselves as. And then we're left with where we started. What drove us to drink? Now, what drove us to use? What drove us to be hateful? What drove us to hurt ourselves? Like, I was a cutter. I was, like, super suicidal for a long time, and, like, drugs and alcohol numbed all that stuff down. And then when I got out of that, all of that shit came back. Like, I'm like, oh, it didn't go anywhere? You mean, like, I was running from something and it was just right behind me the whole time going, you get sober, I'm here, bitch. Like, what's up? Like, facing that, letting go of that. That is the beliefs of who you are that aren't true. And then getting through that opens us up into, like, who we're going to be. Ugh, I love that shit, man. Fucking hell. Taking where you're at right now as a baseline of, like, thinking clearly, how long did it take you to start really thinking clearly?
So I want to kind of laugh and chuckling to myself, because I still question whether or not I'm thinking clearly at least half of the time.
Beautiful. I do too, man.
So I guess the answer to your question would be, like, a little over 11 years.
Like tomorrow I might be. Yeah.
And in 5 years, I'll be like, oh my God, I was bullshitting myself about so much 5 years ago.
Yeah.
Um,
But
so
again, we're talking about like where you're at now as a baseline. Like,
okay.
because again, tomorrow you're going to be in a different place. You're going to be like, oh, this actually, because of something. And did anything tip you off that you might be thinking clearly? Like, did you have an experience where you were just like, oh, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, that would have set me off and I would have gone and done some crazy shit?
Yeah, and I think this is where both you so the steps are incredibly helpful to me. They're like an incredibly useful, like boom, 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 being able to look through and help me to look at my motives. And I really did have expectations around that. After all, that's why I'm so annoyed right now. Or so those are helpful. Meditation has helped me become, still working on this, but more aware of so of my body reactions. So sometimes, maybe I'm in a situation and I can feel myself internally responding to that situation in a way maybe I might have 5 years ago, but maybe 5 years ago I didn't have the insight as to why I was responding that way. And so maybe I would act from that place. And now I'm like, oh, I'm responding in this way because, and then so I have that space and that pause. And then I realize, like, okay, I'm thinking a little more clearly now than I was. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Do you have a certain, for instance, like a story in which like you were interacting with someone, you said something, and as you're walking away, you went, boom, like, oh shit, I'm a different person.
Oh, so the first time that ever happened to me it was several years ago.
Okay.
I think I have situations like that happen now where people maybe are coming to me with where they're kind of worked up and not necessarily shouting or being violent, but a little bit hostile or a little aggressive. And I'm able to kind of take a deep breath and be very much more yielding to them.
Right.
And kind of lower my voice and not look at it as a place of like, oh my God, I'm so afraid, please don't hurt me, so much as a like, hey, I hear you, and I'm just kind of not responding in kind.
Right.
And they kind of calm down and take a step back. And so in those moments, I'm like, I think, oh my goodness, I would have just been like one notch up from them and they would have escalated and then I would have escalated and I don't even know what would have happened.
Right.
The only, for instance, I can really think of right off the bat without feeling is I was with my ex-partner, this is years ago, and she said something that normally, I don't remember what specifically she said, but normally I would have just like flown off the handle because I used to have a really short fuse.
Okay.
And instead, I was like, actually, I understand why you would feel that way. And as those words came out of my mouth, I thought to myself, who the hell am I?
Fuck yeah.
And her eyes were like, oh my God, who are you?
Yeah.
And so that was the first time I recognized something is really happening here.
And the reason that I ask for instance is those are mind altering. Like they change, like when we notice a change in ourselves, like it's like I say you can't unring a bell. That's a place where it's like from that point forward, you now have a different task in front of you, right? Like you've changed. Now let's move forward. Like that's like your graduation day.
You can't unknow it now.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I want, just because I'm not some saint that's floating around doing everything perfectly. The reverse is also true for me now, though. And that is that if I start to behave or respond in a way that isn't who I know myself to kind of be now, I have the same thought. Who am I? What's going on?
And what direction do I want to go?
Yes, because hold on, that's not who I am today.
And that's not who I want to be tomorrow.
Yeah.
Fuck yeah. Well, that's the shit. That's the shit of recovery, right? Like,
I know for me, it, even if I tried to push it down and deny it to myself, my conscience would be eating away at me like the termite that gets in, to the flooring.
right.
I wouldn't be okay with myself, even if I wanted to kind of pull the black curtain down and tell myself it was okay and justify well, he came at me first, so he elicited this response, or that person. I, it wouldn't be okay in my soul. I wouldn't be okay with me.
That's and that's when like you're doing it for you.
Yeah.
What sort of struggles is your life presenting today that, although there's still struggles today, you know that you're going to get past that because of your recovery, because of your practice?
So I'm a caffeine drinker. But that's not the direction I'm going to go in. I'm just kind of confessing my.
Yeah, well, that's fine. Yeah. No. I don't.
I have a couple servings in the morning. I try not to drink past it. Not try. I don't drink it past about noon. Otherwise, it affects my sleep. It is something I'll look at a little down the line. But I think right now I'm really looking at my tendency toward workaholism. And now I'm very fortunate. I'm a boxing coach. Like, I love boxing. It's been a whole part of my life. It's part of my identity right now. And at in a really fundamental way, that some things are part of maybe our identities. So I'm looking at one. I've got, as I'm talking about that, I'm kind of over here thinking about my awareness around my willingness to kind of let go of identities, so I don't stay stuck in having to behave according to labels.
Right.
But that said, it's really looking at my work and how I can nourish this love I have for what it is that I do. I get to connect with some really cool people in this community and share this adventure with them and see them progress. So there's a lot of, and I enjoy it.
Mm-hmm.
While also looking at that and how do I foster that, and how much of it is, how much can I where can I let go? When is it too much work? So I don't know, I guess looking at confronting any workaholism that shows up.
Yeah, it's interesting. So many people, like I talk to a lot of people that have some time, and it's interesting when they say, well, this isn't bad, right? Like they chalk it up as like, well, sure, like, there's still this idea of like, well, I'm a perfectionist, and I'm like, ooh, that's not I don't want to deal with anybody that's a perfectionist, right? Because like there's so many issues with that, and like I'm like, oh, or they're like, oh, well, I'm a workaholic or whatever, and like you're saying, where it's just like, I work all the time, and it's like, yeah, balance is important, and just because you can justify that it's not bad doesn't mean that's what you're looking for in your life, and doesn't mean that that's like if your workaholism gives you value, where in your mind are you not giving you that value intrinsically, right? And that's the thing, that's what you're talking about.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really good tool to start measuring it by, because that can get a little tangled up in becoming aware for me, like, oh, wait a minute. Okay, this is about my value being tied up in how well we do right here in this part of the business, instead of a place of, whoa, how can we make this experience better for the community or better for the coaches, and where I'm not like taking a blow to my ego somehow. So I don't know. I'm in conversation with myself around this, and this is why I say owning the business has been a spiritual experience for me.
Right.
Because it is a great, big, huge mirror. I'm surrounded on all sides by this mirror.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that is what life is, right? Life's a big mirror. It's just showing us where we need to work, like, and that's such a beautiful gift when we can like embrace that. I know we're going to be ending shortly, but I want to, because I also do the Dow chats. I would love for you to pick a number between 1 and 81, and let's read and see if we can talk a little bit about the Dow.
33.
Double numbers are always a really. But a lot of people just double it up. Okay. Oh, this is beautiful. Like, of course it's this one, right? Knowing others is wisdom. Knowing the self is enlightenment. Mastering others requires force. Mastering the self requires strength. He who knows he is enough is rich. Perseverance is a sign of willpower. He who stays where he is endures. To die, but not perish, is to be eternally present.
That's interesting. There's so many different translations. I have a different translation, so it's interesting to hear the different translations.
Yeah, that was Jane English. So, what came to mind in terms of that? Like maybe even this new translation. What came to mind for you?
I was actually trying to hear in your translation because I pulled up mine.
Yeah.
In your translation to see what. So when I read the Tao, I try to be aware of how much I'm trying to think to understand it.
Right.
Like how much my brain is trying to process to intellectually understand it.
Right.
Because maybe and then I try to kind of like disregard it.
Shut up! Come on, we can.
Because it gets in the way of my being able to have an experience or let kind of a seed be planted.
Mm-hmm.
So when I read it, come around and read it the next time. So in comparison,
read Stevens real briefly.
So it's knowing others is intelligence. Knowing yourself is true wisdom. Mastering others is strength. Mastering yourself is true power. If you realize that you have enough, you are truly rich.
Mm-hmm.
If you stay in the center and embrace death with your whole heart, you will endure forever. And that's the line that's really, as you were reading that last part, that I was trying to see how the two, what the similarities.
Like Jane English's version, when she says to die but not to perish is to be eternally present.
Yes.
That to me is fucking powerful, because I'm like, wait a minute, how many times have the person I defined myself as died? And here I am, anew, right? Yes. Like when you saw I'm gonna use broad terms here. When you saw the birth of your new self, when you responded to your ex-partner, and you were just like, who is this? Something like that old definition of who you were, you couldn't unlearn that, died. And here you are, new. Like that's beauty.
And this is how I move forward in my life. And so that line, along with kind of just that idea of like what it means to embrace death with your whole heart, yeah, and remain at the center of me as who I am, is what has stood out the most.
Yeah, and that's growth, right? Like that is rebirth, and well, I think that's a great verse. So thank you for picking up on that and bringing it to us. And Lee, oh my God, thank you so much for all of your time and just everything that you shared. And really, I'm super excited to be connected.
Right on. And likewise, thank you for asking. make it
Oh,
done.
no, absolutely. Absolutely. I want to thank Coach Lee for all his time and everything that he shared. If you want to get in touch with him, Coach Lee Torres on Instagram, or you can find links to everything that we're talking about in the description of this video. Once again, I'm your host, MartinJon, and this is the Recover Yourself podcast. Please review and rate this on your favorite podcast app and leave comments. Anytime you leave a comment, I'll take it into consideration, because all I want to do is reach more people and have something you want to hear and something that can help you grow within your recovery. Until next week, keep recovering yourself.